where are you looking for? This is when I'd say we have AGI.
2070, 2075, something like that.
I'd say it's going to be after 2075.
So what I would say is that
this is Philosophy Programs and Prompts. I'm Casey Hart, and I'm here with...
I'm Carl Brown.
Welcome. And we're both humans. And we hope if you're listening to this podcast, you are also a human. We're going to introduce you over the course of this podcast to who we are, what sort of stuff we're going to cover. But in coming episodes, we're going to hit current events in the world of artificial intelligence and things that we take issue with and things that we really like. And the overall goal here is that it's a balanced take from two real humans who actually know something about AI. How is that, Carl? Is that in the ballpark of what you're thinking?
Yeah, that works.
Okay. And it should be conversational. And we are not going to be super careful. We both have YouTube channels. We'll talk about that. We're curating everything we're doing and we're trying to get all the citations right. And this is our chance to be sloppy and more colloquial, I guess. So I'll say a little bit about the background of this. Carl and I met because we do YouTube channels, and somebody, I don't know if this was your first experience, Carl, but somebody on one of the comments was like, hey, you should watch this guy's video, and like linked me to yours. And then I saw that they had said the same to you. And so we messaged each other. Was that your recollection?
It was something like, I want to say the first I saw, one of your videos ended up popping up in my algorithm, and I clicked on it and was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. Because there was some intellectual rigor behind the way that you were talking about AI in a way that there aren't a lot of people out there that are doing right now. So I really appreciated that.
Awesome. Well, all right. That means a lot. This is my primary goal with this podcast, is just trying to trick Carl into complimenting me over and over again. But the feeling was definitely mutual. And so I guess maybe it's worth saying just a couple of, minutes here of background about the two of us. So I'm Casey. I got my PhD in philosophy, and I'm an ontologist, which broadly speaking, if you don't know what that is, check out my channel, but you'll get more of a flavor for that. But I'm building data models that are graph data models that help ground artificial intelligence instead of just like the LLM machine learning driven thing. They're graph structures that can be the equivalent of the logical side of the brain. Here's a world model that can fit into AI. So I've been building that for a variety of companies over the years, and that gets me in contact with a bunch of people who are interested in adopting AI and what does this mean and how do we think about these sorts of things. And my background being academic philosophy and wanting to be a professor and teacher, I sort of look for outlets for teaching and distilling ideas and putting these things together. And the YouTube world and podcasts is a fun space for me to do that. And hopefully, over the course of many episodes to come, help distill some of these ideas in ways that make sense to other people, or at least just get clear on them for myself. So that's where I'm coming from. You want to take a shot, Carl?
Yeah. So I'm Carl Brown. I have been doing computer stuff, software stuff for a living since the late 80s. I have been in the DevOps side. I've been a programmer. I've been a project manager. I've been a security engineer or security policy writer kind of thing. And I have spent a lot of time in my career rescuing projects. So coming in when somebody, hired the lowest bidder and then got crap and then needed to turn that crap into something that actually worked. And it turns out that that's not far from what cleaning up after AI is like. And then what happened for me was I was talking to my daughter who was in college, and she was talking to some of her classmates in her computer class. And they were like, oh, your dad's a programmer. Ask him if we're still going to have a job in a few years, because my parents are freaking out because the news is telling them that there are going to be no programming jobs in 5 years. So I said, okay, fine. I'll just write up a blog post or something so that you can get it to your friends. And I got, Dad, no one my age will ever find or read your blog. So I put up a couple of episodes on a YouTube channel. I figured I would have as many subscribers as there were members of her computer class. And it turned out that I struck a nerve. And so I have now been on YouTube for a couple of years. And I've tried to be a realistic voice, because AI is not going to go away and there are things that it's useful for, but a lot of the hype is really not useful, and a lot of the things that the companies are pushing are complete garbage. So there aren't a lot of people I found that are kind of in between the two extremes. It's a lot of like, this is completely useless, or, you know, this is the second coming, and neither of those are true.
Beautiful. And that is, there'll be more intros to us. You'll get to know the two of us as we go throughout these podcasts. So hopefully that will come to the surface. But what we wanted to do for this first episode was just talk about AGI. And in particular, I think the thing that distinguishes the two of us, other than having some real industry expertise in different parts of the industry, right? I'm more graph building and maybe some more of the philosophical underpinnings, and you actually make stuff work, which is nice. We're distinguished by, we think these tools are really cool and we want to use them and we want to adopt them. And we're almost begrudgingly, maybe not begrudgingly for me, I enjoy being a contrarian. But if I find myself in a room where everybody's like, this is the coolest thing ever and going to revolutionize everything, I'm probably the one who's going to like lean back and rolling my eyes and not wanting to fall into that. So we're going to fall somewhere between the doomers and the zoomers, as they say about AI. Like, it's not going to be a panacea for all the world's ills. It's also probably not going to be the extinction level event that kills all of us. There are chances for both of those things, but I think they are very low compared to a bunch of other things on my radar. And what we want is just sort of an open place where people can get some of that information. And so maybe before we talk more about like what AI is and AGI, and I really want to get to, if I was setting a gambling line, like what would your over under be? But before we say that, because we're going to say negative things about all sorts of CEOs of companies, in part because they stand to profit a crazy amount from hyping up AI. Or on the other side, your Eliezer Yudkowskis stand to make a lot of money by saying that it's going to doom us all, right? So how much money are you going to make from artificial intelligence? What are your financial stakes?
I'm invested in a bunch of mutual funds. I'm sure that some percentage of that, given that a high percentage of the S&P 500 is, tech stocks at the moment, that probably quite a bit of that. But I honestly have no idea what the percentage of my portfolio that corresponds to AI or not, and I deliberately haven't looked. I don't have. For a while I had some actual Amazon shares that were left over from when I actually worked at Amazon, but I've actually cashed those out. So I don't have any. I think I might have some individual stocks from Residio, which is a auto thermostat company from when I worked there still, but they're not into AI as far as I know. So I don't have any specific AI-specific investments that I know of or incentives that I know of.
Nice. I think this illustrates how much more like practical and on top of things Carl is than I am, because I was going to say like I don't stand to profit very much, and Carl's like, I will link my 2025 taxes in the description. Full disclosure. But yeah, I'm the same. Like, I'm not pushing any startups or things like that like, I'm the solution, or selling the solution to hallucinations or anything like that. Obviously, I mean, both of us stand to profit some from this industry. Like, we hope you're subscribing to these podcasts and our YouTube channels. And I think I've now collectively earned $140 from YouTube ad revenue. So you might be able to double or triple that in the coming months. But yeah, really, this is not a thing. Like, it's a fallacy to look at someone and say they stand to profit from this, so what they say must be false, right? Like, that's not good reasoning. But if you see someone and they stand to profit a ton from something, it's a good chance for you to like, let's temper my expectations. Let's really kick the tires on the kind of arguments that they're making, and hopefully, we are two folks that you can take a little more seriously, because we're not here just hyping up something that we can rug pull you on.
The other thing about the financial interest thing, when people have a financial interest in trying to tell you what they're trying to, in you believing what they're trying to tell you, and they don't disclose the fact that they have a financial interest in it, that's a big red flag.
Yeah.
Right. When they're not being transparent about the fact that if you believe this, I'm going to make a crap load of money. that's a thing to be on the lookout for.
Yeah, and you're getting dangerously close to saying political statements, Carl. We're trying to steer from those, but this is an anti-corruption podcast, but that's as far as we'll go right now. So let's talk AGI.
Okay.
Maybe we should talk like briefly AI first, because AGI just throws the G in the middle, right?
Mm-hmm.
But AI, artificial intelligence, which by the way, I'll float out there. We've workshopped the title for this a lot for this podcast. We tried a bunch of variations on AIs. So listeners, if you think of one that you really like, let us know. We're pretty happy with philosophy programs and prompts, but we can be persuaded otherwise. But artificial intelligence is a famously tricky thing to pin down what that's supposed to mean. I have like a video series on this, and I land with something like it's a discipline, right? It's a field, like economics is a field. But any particular entity or technology, I don't think of as being AI, other than it sort of was the field of AI gave rise to that thing. Like I wouldn't talk about a coffee mug as I have like being engineering, even though studies in engineering allowed us to produce a thing. I also wouldn't say that like my laptop is science, even though it came out of science. But we seem to think like this laptop is AI or this laptop has AI in it. And that's the way that we talk about these things. So my general take is when you're saying that, it would be better off if you were more explicit about what the technology was. Like this is a chatbot or this is a large language model driven thing. And then that makes it clear what's going on. And that AI in general, I think, is a term for obfuscation, but it broadly falls into machines that are doing things that humans could normally do or would like to be able to do intellectually, and just be pretty hand-wavy about it there and acknowledge that that vagueness can be a problem. Where do you go with defining AI?
So I actually have a video where I go into 6 different meanings that AI can have when people talk about it recently. Things like, it might be what you see in science fiction. It might be the academic discipline. It might be the thing that a computer might be able to do several thousand years from now, given infinite resources. It might be what a chatbot is currently doing. It might be what the current bubble is going to be able to do. And so a lot of times when people talk about AI these days, they want you to believe one of those definitions, but they want to be able to fall back to a different definition in the case that they get called on it and said, that's not true. So when they say, AI has a PhD level smarts in every subject, right? Like Sam Altman likes to do. And somebody goes, no, ChatGPT isn't. It's like, oh, I'm talking about AI in general, right? So there's a lot of changing the definition of the word when somebody calls them on stuff.
Yeah, for purposes of my investors, it's really freaking awesome. And for purposes of legal liability, it is the smallest and most understandable. Like, I'm basically just a calculator. That's what I'm developing. Yeah. So then we've got AGI, and AGI fits into this, right? So the G is for general. And general intelligence, we can chop up the AI space in a number of different ways. We can talk about how broad or narrow that it is. And so narrow AI is stuff that is like tailored to a very particular purpose, where, these things come in degrees, but maybe something like a chess AI is very narrow. It just does one thing. It plays the game of chess. And then you can imagine another one that plays the game of Go. And then you can imagine a more generalized version that can play multiple games. Okay. And then we can imagine one that can also play the stock market, and then one that can also schedule my appointments for the week. And then as that gets broader and broader, we end up at sort of the far end of that pole, I think, as the G, the generalized intelligence, which is that it can do things as widely as a human brain could do. Is that roughly how you understand AGI too?
Yeah, I mean, so the definition that I've heard bandied around is something like is able to do all of the economically relevant work that a remote human being can do, or something like that. And that was I think that was for purposes of like contractual there was some contract between Microsoft and OpenAI about when AGI is achieved, and that was the way they defined it for purposes of that contract.
Which again is the, like, who are you talking to? Are you talking to your shareholders?
Right.
Like, that colors what we mean by AI. Yeah.
Yeah. AGI. So AGI, I think, primarily is what we used to call AI before the current round of chatbot stuff tried to kind of incorporate that they were AI. It's what you see in the movies. It's the Terminator. It's the Skynet. It's the Matrix. It's those Agent Smith in the Matrix. It's those kinds of things, right? That's the idea. Something that's more or less indistinguishable from a human, not just in the moment, but over the long term. And one of the things that happens a lot of times is we put time bounds on things. And so in a 20-minute exercise, it's a lot easier for a chatbot to convince you that it's a human than if you're maintaining a relationship with one for, a day or a week or a month or something like that, right?
And this reminds me, there's like Meter or something like that, which METR, I think, which is like they do a bunch of charts about how quote unquote AI performs tasks in the same time boxes as humans. Like, okay, once it can do the task with a 50% accuracy and 90% of what it would take a human, then it's equivalent or something like that.
Yeah.
We just they're really grasping for how do we measure this stuff, which in and of itself, not inherently bad, right? Like quantifying these things is good.
That particular graph, what they're trying to do basically is show that the amount of human equivalent work as measured in hours that an AI can do is doubling every 3 or 4 months or 6 months or something like that. It's like 180 days. I don't remember exactly what it is, and it keeps changing. But that's supposed to be a line to get to point to, super AI takeoff kind of, thing. I'm not a big fan of the kinds of tasks that they're judging, and I don't know that the idea that AI can do something faster than a human is really that relevant. Because a lot of times, it's like I say sometimes or quite often, AI can't write programs that are better than a human can write, but an AI can write a lot more and a lot better code in an hour than a human can write in an hour. Right. And a lot of the benchmarks that we deal with and a lot of the things that people point to are things that are intentionally designed to only last for an hour or 2 hours or whatnot.
And so this brings us, and maybe before we say some of the problems with it, which I think we're kind of getting into now, let's talk AGI gambling lines over under, right? So Kalshi or whatever, speaking of corruption, comes to you and says, all right, you get to take a bet on when we arrive at AGI. And we'll let you set the over under year. Now, there's been a bunch of stuff out there. There was like AI 2027 or whatever that was getting a ton of buzz 9 months ago, something like that. I feel like that was when that was biggest. You have Yudkowsky and Soros, who I don't know that they've set a particular year, but they're like, we're in the like next 5 years or something like that is when their doom window is. If you are setting the line, like, are you talking about it 2032? Like, where are you looking for? This is when I'd say we have AGI with all the vagueness of what AGI is. And we'll say more about that.
So I'm going to say 2070, 2075, something like that. And this is why, because I believe that in order for us to get to AGI, where AGI is effectively trying to simulate or emulate what the human brain does, we're going to have to understand what the human brain does, and we just don't. There was a project that ended a few years ago where they spent 10 years and several billion euro trying to map the human brain, and they failed because it's that complicated. And so I think we're going to have to spend a good 20 or 30 or 40 years really studying and understanding what the brain is, because obviously 10 years isn't anywhere nearly enough based on the fact that we've tried and failed already once. And once we understand what and how the human brain is actually wired together and how it functions, then maybe we have a chance of emulating it, but I don't think we have a chance of getting to AGI before then. So that's my stake in the ground.
Nice. That's well, at the risk of being bored, like while you were coming up with your answer, right? And I was thinking about that earlier this morning. I was like, what would I set that? If I was setting a gambling line, I'd set it at 2075, and I'd still probably take the over. I'd say it's going to be after 2075. And when I was thinking about that, I don't have as firm of a and maybe we can press on your, do we have to understand the human brain in order to make AGI, which is I'm not convinced that that's true. But for me, there's so many things that have to line up and work out for us to get to AGI. It's just such a hard problem. And I haven't, while I'm encouraged by tons of cool things these tools can do, they don't, to me, seem like we're going towards AGI as much as, tools that can write better. Then I wonder if part of my 2075 is like, I'll probably be close to dead by then. And like, that's just sort of my personal, I was going to say context window. That's going to be an overused phrase in these podcasts. But like, that's just my time horizon. Like, I don't know what's going to happen beyond that, but I'm pretty skeptical that we'll have something that you or I would be willing to call AGI. And that's part of the thing about meter and stuff like that, right? Whereas we could defend that there's AGI today. If you really want to, we can just work our way with definitions, right? We say, okay, well, what it means to be AGI is, so AI just means an automatic process to some degree that a human mind could do. And you're like, human minds could, make schedules. They can order things from Amazon, and they can play chess. And so if you can make a computer program that does all three of those things, then it's AGI. And we can do that absolutely today, right? So I guess maybe pushing back to you, given that if you give me some arbitrary set of tasks like that, right? Maybe not potentially any task, but like three that I would hire somebody to do, like, my secretary to do this stuff. I don't know that I would have them play chess, but whatever. Why not say that we have AGI? Because for any specification of stuff, we could probably build some tool that automates it. Or do you think that's false?
So what I would say is that the most fundamental thing, I think, that we as humans do is learn. And AIs don't learn. They're trained. When they're done training, they're done. And all of the things that seem like learning are just them reading the same document over and over again before they spit out the next word. And I do not think that you can call something intelligent or have general intelligence or be human level intelligence if it can't learn and like have a long-term memory and have some mechanism for going from short-term memory to long-term memory. We don't understand how any of that works, but fundamentally, if what you're having to do is every time I ask you a question, you have to read every single word we've ever had in this conversation again, answer the question, and then forget all of it. And the next time I ask you a question, you have to read everything, including the last question and the last answer, and then answer the next one. That doesn't count as human level intelligence to me.
Good. Yeah, the generality there, I think that you're pushing at is, so one way to conceive of generality is you can specify some range of tasks, and that can be a broader range, and I can accomplish all of them. But this sort of gets the scope wrong, I think, in your view, right? We don't specify a set of tasks and then say what is general enough to handle it. We say, give me an intelligence that is flexible and plastic enough that you can lock it in a room with me and we can teach it something new, right? You don't have to start with that knowledge already programmed into it. So we can, you can train a chess AI bot or something like that. That's fine. And then let's say we sit down together and we invent a new board game, alongside it, and then have it learn how to play that one or something where it's actually sort of growing and processing the changes along with us. And I don't see something like that happening. Another thing that, and this I'm sure we'll talk about at length other times, I'm looking for understanding in something that's got an AI, like something that I feel is really like interacting with and engaging in the world and latched onto it in certain ways. And I think that it's not exactly what you're saying, but it tracks with it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with understanding is, like, how do I know that you understand? You know what I mean? It's like I think that I understand, right? And I see in people around me things that indicate to me that they understand, right? But I don't actually know what's going on inside your head or anybody's head, and I don't understand what's going on inside the chatbot, right? I mean, in that kind of whether or not it understands, right? And that word is not specific enough to actually be really useful in a, does understand or doesn't understand. It's kind of a vague, and it gets used in a anthropomorphic context all the time, right? We talk about, or at least we in computer science talk about algorithms understanding things and wanting things and all that kind of stuff. Our language isn't really designed to be able to distinguish between something that we think of as understanding and whether or not the thing really understands, whatever that means.
Yeah, that's good. And this point, you said something earlier that was evocative of the Turing test too, right? Like that's sort of what we're getting at. One of the things that Turing was doing was saying it's really hard to figure out whether something's a mind or not, right? And maybe we can just sort of eschew that question and instead say, can we get it? Can we set up some test where we can say it's indistinguishable from some things that we think do have minds, right? So if you can have a conversation with a chatbot but not know you're having a conversation with a chatbot, then by what right do we have to say that it's any less of a mind than the other person, that you couldn't tell whether you were talking with them or with this particular computer program? You can do something similar for understanding, at least. I mean, if I was going to push back on what you said a little bit, I'd say that in much of the things that we're calling AI, like, ChatGPT or whatever, there just isn't a mechanism by which they interact with the world at all. And if there's not even theoretically a mechanism for their, the words that they're saying to have meanings and be like latched on to things in the real world, then I don't think that we can say they're understanding.
Okay, so when you talk about meaning, so the thing that's really interesting and really useful about AIs, the current generation of AIs, is that they have this vector space in which they define what a word is in terms of a bunch of different other words, right?
Yeah.
And this attention mechanism that the current chatbot, that gives the current chatbots a lot of their understanding, that's not the right word, but a lot of their functionality is, they can tell the difference between, as I usually say, not left and not wrong.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Which is a thing that, like, when you try to search Google, the word right can mean a bunch of different things. But the way this attention mechanism works, it can distinguish, assuming the sentence is long enough and clear enough, between what you meant by that word, right? And when you say something or other not right, then it can know which word the not was supposed to modify. Whereas if you go to Google and you search for that you're going to get a page with the word not on it, which is not a useful, right? That's not a useful thing to search for. And so to the extent that defining a word as a particular point in a 32,000 dimension vector space is meaningful, I could actually argue that it knows the meaning of the word or understands the meaning of the word in a way that maybe we don't even sometimes.
So I don't think that's right. And this is a long conversation that I don't want to over-index our first podcast here on this stuff. I think you're right. There's like meaningful information stored there. What I came around to, I used to say LLMs don't understand anything. And now I think that they do understand how we use language. So I think of that vector space as an understanding of the word's usage, but I think that's distinct from understanding what the word means.
Okay.
So if I have that vector space down, I am able to recreate sentences that more people will assent to and be like, yeah, that was used those words correctly. But that's different in my point of view, from understanding, like, those words denote concepts out in the real world to us
Right.
and explain how the world works and functions. And I don't think the LLM, even theoretically, can have any, just because it's totally detached from that stuff.
That's fair.
So I describe it as like you have like a map is of the world in some way, like I described the mountain ridges or whatever, and valleys and lakes, and then you could describe the map, and you could understand the map really well, even if you hadn't understood the original world. LMs are trained up on corpuses of uses of our language, and based on how we use the language, that bears a resemblance to the way the world works, right? There's a reason why all
Right.
those Reddit posts it's trained over say certain things about, ravens and being black, because it turns out that ravens exist in the real world and they're black. But the LLM is trained up on that language usage and not on the meanings of those terms. And so the it looks as if it understands things in lots of cases, but I think there's a distinction to be made there. But I'm
That's
I'm open to the conversation.
that's an interesting conversation. So I have a physics degree, right? And
Yeah.
to me, the point that the point at which a thing exists in a multidimensional space is a meaningful object in a physics sense, right? When you're in a Hamiltonian space, when you're doing calculations, the fact that you can calculate where in this giant vector space a thing is a meaningful location. It's a meaningful attribute for that object or field or whatever it is. So it's we could have a whole episode about basically what the difference between usage and meaning is. We can have that at some point, but
Yeah.
we shouldn't over-index on this one.
Bring in some Wittgenstein and stuff too. What I want to sort of back out to now, right, is kind of the thing that you brought, like your motivating example for getting into this space. Like, how can we present things that like friends and family and people who are like, what the heck is this AI thing doing? And we can't just make blog posts because they won't find us.
Right.
And instead, we're making this podcast now, which hopefully people have found. And if you're listening to this right now, you have found. What is the takeaway you want them to have about AGI? They hear a ton about it. Mine is just relax. Don't buy all the hype. Don't buy all the doom. There's some really cool stuff going on there, and it's worth paying attention to. But it's also not worth losing a bunch of sleep overnight. There are more important things going on in the world from that perspective. What do you tell people?
So what I tell people is that AI is just another in a long series of automation tools, right? There have been many, as we've computerized things, as we, even as we created punch cards and looms to do weaving back in the, 1800s or whatever that was, 1700s, depending on where exactly you're counting. We've had this long history of creating tools that take work off of our plates, right? And that let us care less about some of the details and be able to jump up to a higher level of abstraction to be able to think larger about the problem and not have to worry about some of the minutia. And the current level of AI, the generative AIs are just one more iteration of that long line of human technology. It's not something that's unique. It's not something that's going to be looked back on 100 years from now or 2,000 years from now as a complete inflection point, the way that a lot of people are talking about it. It's not like the invention of fire. It's not like the invention of the wheel. It's not like the invention of the transistor. The reason that people are saying that is because, they have a financial interest in you believing that, and they want you to think that it's the next thing since sliced bread so that you'll use it, so that you have fear of missing out if you don't spend a lot of time on it. Now, that said, it's a useful tool. There's a lot of things that you can do with it. Sticking your head in the sand and saying, I'm not going to have anything to do with it is probably not the best idea, but it's not something that's going to, completely change the entire world in the whole world order. There are things that are potentially coming that might, but this is not one of them.
This is, just citing your Ecclesiastes, right? There's nothing new under the sun. Everything is meaningless. Yeah, and to your point, we can even be a little nicer, maybe, to some of the people who say this is crazy and revolutionary, and you need to get all on board. Some of it are people who just tend to want to profit a lot from it. But also, if you just keep turning the clock back, like you look at what people were saying in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s or the early 2000s, people are always saying that this is the moment, right?
Yeah.
This is the time when everything has changed. This is the technology that does it. Now, that doesn't mean that people are always wrong, but it should give us a little bit of hesitance about, when people are saying this is the crazy thing that's going to, this is the time, this is what's going to change everything.
This time it's different again.
People have always been saying that, and you should be cognizant of it. And maybe they're right this time, but also, if you overreact to each one of those, you just can't live your life, and you're gonna be in a constant state of panic and upheaval. And to be fair, if I want to play devil's advocate there a little bit more, it has changed a ton about our economy,
Sure.
right? There's a lot of money in artificial intelligence right now. In fact, that's why it's incredibly scary in lots of ways, the potential of the bubble popping, if it is a bubble at all. So I get people being afraid of, wait, I just have to change everything in my life about this. But I think that's right. Just mostly just temper expectations a bit, and lower your pulse somewhat on stressing out about AI craziness.
Yeah, I mean, so I've been doing this a long time, right? So when I started my career, there wasn't really an internet. I mean, it existed, but it was pretty much only connecting colleges and military installations, right? It wasn't really a thing that companies did yet. There was not a web browser. I graduated from college the year the first cross-platform web browser was published. So the World Wide Web basically didn't exist when I got my first job, which is while I was still in college, my first computer job. There was no Google. There was no place there was no Wikipedia. There was no place you could copy and paste information. There was no Stack Overflow, which is a thing that we use as computer people that have a lot of explanations of how answers to specific kind of computer questions.
It's the thing that's training ChatGPT to answer most of your programming questions right now. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's a thing that has happened where, unlike when I was starting out, computer people can now say, I don't want to write code that does networking. I'm going to put this line of thing in a configuration file, and it's going to go grab a library that already knows how to do networking, and it's going to copy it down and stick it into my project, right? And when those kinds of things happen, every single one of those, people have said, okay, we're going to need fewer programmers, right? It's like, oh, all programmers are going to be doing, this is, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, all people are going to be doing is they're going to be just grabbing a bunch of libraries off the shelf and just putting a few lines of code in to hook them together, and there's not going to be any real programming stuff, right? That's not what happened. And it turns out that...
Spoiler.
Right. And it turns out that basically the more of the low-level stuff that we can kind of abstract away and say, cool, poof, there's a networking stack, then the more functionality we can make the bigger thing, right? Mm-hmm. And the more, we now do routinely the kinds of things that wouldn't have been feasible 20 years ago, right? And this is just another instance of that. Right. And there will be, we will still have junior programmers. We will still have, journalists. It's just that what a journalist does and what a junior programmer does is going to be different once we figure out exactly how once we integrate these generative AIs into all of our work processes. But right now, we're still in a lot of trying to figure out what this thing is, right? We're kind of in the, what is this internet thing after all kind of thing. The vast majority of us that don't do manual labor, and even some of us that do manual labor, our jobs are very different than they were before the internet.
Yeah.
Right. And there was a period of time when, trying to figure out how your job was going to adjust to the internet was a thing that, we didn't know what was going to happen with that. I mean, when I was in college, I had exactly one professor the entire time I was in college that used email to communicate with students. right? Which is just
that's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, that's unfathomable now, right? I was getting email from my daughter's elementary school, but that was absolutely not a thing when I was in college. So the job of a teacher now involves a whole lot more email than it did, 40 years ago, because there wasn't such a thing really 40 years ago. And we'll just need to figure out kind of what jobs look like now that this technology exists. And part of the reason that we're not doing a good job of understanding what jobs look like when this technology exists is because the companies that are providing this technology keep insisting that the technology is going to be completely different in 6 months or a year or 2 years or whatever. And so don't get used to what it currently is, because it's still in the mix of becoming, super intelligent or whatever the heck. And so because everybody is still believing, or not everybody's still believing, but so many people are believing and so many people are saying that we're on the lower part of this curve and it's going to go crazy. We haven't spent a lot of time understanding exactly how to integrate all of this, because we're not exactly sure what all of this is yet.
Yeah.
And once we get to the point where we've decided, and we've got, I like to talk about the fact that one of the co-founders of OpenAI, Ilya, I never can pronounce his name correctly, said recently on a podcast, the scaling has tapped out and we are now entering a new phase of research, or something to that effect, because we need to figure out what the next breakthrough is going to be, the next equivalent of the all you need is attention, or attention is all you need transformer architecture thing that happened in 2017 that kicked off this new round of chatbots. And we don't know what the new breakthrough is going to be, and we don't know when it's going to happen. But so, once people actually admit that, this is what we've got, right? And we need to figure out how to live with what we've got. And we need to figure out how jobs are going to adjust to the fact that this is what we've got. Then we'll figure out kind of what the new world order, I hate that phrase. How
a lot of the tech founders like that phrase a lot.
How jobs are going to change and what jobs are going to look like now, based on the fact that this technology exists and we understand like some of the limitations of the technology and some of the things that we need to make sure that we don't do with it, some of the ways we can avoid some of the big problems with it, like, made up court cases and, the
encoding racial bias into things, and lots of bad stuff. And once we figure out kind of how to mitigate some of that stuff, then we'll have a better understanding of kind of what that means in terms of employment and that kind of thing. But right now we're in this kind of no man's land where the disruption has started, but we don't understand the extent of it yet. And it's, as I say about the future, it's not evenly distributed. There are a lot of the disruption is very unevenly distributed, because there are a lot of people that are making decisions about jobs and about layoffs and about economics and that kind of thing, who aren't technical enough and who don't listen to this kind of podcast and who don't really know what hype they can believe and what hype they can't believe. And so they're making decisions based on believing some of this hype and some of these promises. And that's causing a lot of problems. There are already companies that are starting to have to rehire the equivalent jobs to people that they laid off. And so we'll find out kind of what everything is going to look like. And at the moment, we're still in this real chaos kind of a moment. There was a lot of really good stuff there. I mean, one thing you had me thinking about is just like we have these other technologies that are replacing things, right? And that is disruptive, whether that be the internet coming on the scene, whether that be the cotton gin, whether that be the printing press. Like all of these things are disruptive, and they are not eliminating the need for all work. Maybe they tend to increase the amount of like executive function that's important at work, right? They sort of take away some of the, maybe we say minutia or whatever, the more manual components, but then they allow us to think more strategically. I think that's always a good skill to be developing. But then you brought up the case for email, right? And you're like, wait, actually email has introduced a lot more minutia into my life in a bunch of ways too. So even that's not even on that front. But the overall take home, which I think is really good, is, at the same time, you don't freak out about everything, but like try and get an even-handed understanding of what's going on, and don't just think, well, the curve's going up steeply, I'm going to check out for 6 months and then come back and see where you're at because I don't
Right.
want to waste my time on that stuff. Yeah, don't just like fall for the flavor of the month each month. But if you can get like a few bite-sized examples of what kind of stuff is happening, that will really help you digest what is meaningful going forward and to not fall for some of the hype stuff. If you understand what the initial, this I think is really in common for all of the people that I would say, this is biased, but have the correct view of LLMs, like do not overhype them. Those are the people who often describe them as like, oh, it's autocomplete, but like turned up to 11, right? And I think that's the right characterization. It's really important. It's really cool. But if you know that that's kind of the underlying thing that's going on, we're building off of this giant vector space that gives us word meanings, or not meanings, but relationships or whatever, then we understand a little bit about the basis, and that lets us see, okay, what are some of the limitations of that, and how are we going to operate within those limitations?
Yeah. I mean, going back to employment for a second. So a couple of things that I like to point out to people to make them feel a little better about the employment chaos at the moment is telephone operators and typists, which were both like professions. There was a point in which something like, 40% of all women that were employed in the US workforce were telephone operators, right? And for the most part, they're all gone. There are still some receptionists that answer the phones at big companies, but, a lot of them are even being replaced by, press 1 for English, press 2 for Spanish kind of, robot things. But, that didn't, that didn't destroy the economy, right? That wasn't the end of all jobs, but there were a whole bunch of people that had gotten, good, well-paying jobs to be telephone operators, and all those jobs went away. And we, as a society, I would like for us to do a better job with figuring out, how to help people whose jobs just all went away, and figure out how to make them productive again.
Yeah. How do we ease these like giant social transitions, these moves? But at the same time, like you said, it's not like, well, then suddenly for there on out, it was a 20% unemployment rate because there were no longer any typists, or there are no longer, the invention of the photocopier saves a ton of work, but it generates a ton of work. And yeah, awesome. This is such a cool conversation. I'm super excited to be able to have this with you, and many more to come. We'll throw, we'll be posting a couple of different venues probably, but to the extent you can reach out and throw some comments on this, ask some questions that you want to talk about or have us talk about in the coming episodes, let us know. But Carl and I have a number of things that we're excited to talk about going forward. I want to pick your brain and steal as much of your expertise as I can in these coming episodes.
I'm really looking forward to them. This has been a lot of fun.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.